Why you feel split inside? What is splitting in borderline personality disorder? Jung's concepts today. Have you ever had that strange, unsettling feeling that there are two completely different and opposing versions of you living inside the same skin? There is the one side that shows up to the world every day. This is the version of you that gets through the tasks, that smiles when it is expected, that says the right words at the right time, and that keeps everything moving forward. This is your public self, your capable self. But then there is the other side, a side that feels left behind, unheard and unseen. This is the one that carries the silent weight of your doubts, the quiet ache of your sadness, or the persistent nagging whisper in the back of your mind that says, "I am not whole. Something is fundamentally fractured." This profound inner tension, this feeling of being at war with yourself, can be utterly exhausting. In modern psychology, we have a term for one of the most extreme versions of this experience: splitting, a phenomenon most commonly associated with borderline personality disorder. It is the tendency to see the world, other people, and even oneself in stark black and white terms. A person is either all good, a savior on a pedestal, or they are all bad, a monster in the trash heap. There is no gray area, no room for nuance, no capacity to hold two opposing truths at the same time. But what if this concept, which we now view through a clinical lens, is not just a symptom of a modern disorder, but a profound expression of a much older, more universal human struggle? What would the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung, a man who mapped the deepest territories of the human soul long before these labels existed, have to say about this feeling of being split inside? Today we are going on a journey to answer that very question. We will explore how Jung's foundational concepts, the persona, the shadow, and the process of integration, provide a rich, compassionate, and deeply insightful framework for understanding not only the clinical idea of splitting, but the silent internal division that so many of us feel in our daily lives. Jung may not have used the term borderline personality disorder, but he spent his entire life studying the very psychic forces that create this profound sense of inner fragmentation. He understood that this feeling of being split is not a sign that you are broken, but a sacred call from your own soul, an invitation to embark on the courageous journey of becoming whole. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover is that the very wound that makes you feel so divided is also the source of your greatest potential for healing and transformation. To understand the modern concept of splitting, let's first look at how it manifests. A person experiencing splitting might one day view their therapist as the most brilliant, life-saving person they have ever met. They are placed on the highest pedestal, seen as infallible, perfect, all good. But the very next day, after a minor disappointment, perhaps the therapist was a few minutes late or said something that was misinterpreted, that same therapist is suddenly seen as the worst, most incompetent practitioner in the world. They are a monster, uncaring, malicious, all bad. The shift is instantaneous and total. The person is not just disappointed. Their entire perception of the therapist has flipped from one extreme to the other. This isn't just about people. It can happen with situations, with jobs, and most painfully, with the self. One day, a person might feel on top of the world, capable and worthy. The next, they are plunged into a chasm of self-loathing, convinced they are a complete and utter failure. Now, where would Jung begin to unravel this? He would likely start with one of his most fundamental concepts, the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask we wear to face the world. It is the curated, socially acceptable version of ourselves that we present in our various roles: the good employee, the loving partner, the responsible parent. The shadow, on the other hand, is everything we have disowned and pushed away into the unconscious, because it was deemed unacceptable by our family, our culture, or ourselves. It is not necessarily evil. It simply contains everything that doesn't fit the polished image of the persona. This includes our negative emotions like anger, envy, and greed, but it can also include our positive qualities like our creativity, our assertiveness, or our vulnerability, if those traits were shamed or rejected in our early lives. Jung would argue that for most people, there is a natural and flexible tension between these two forces. We are aware of our mask, and we are, to some degree, aware of the hidden parts of ourselves. But what happens when, due to early trauma or a deeply invalidating environment, the need to maintain a perfect or all-good persona becomes a matter of psychic survival? The child learns that to be loved and to be safe, they must only be good, compliant, and pleasing. Any feeling or impulse that contradicts this, anger, neediness, defiance, is not just unacceptable, it is a terrifying threat to their sense of attachment and safety. These bad parts are then violently repressed, cast out into the deepest, darkest corners of the shadow. What results is not a healthy tension, but a radical defensive split. The conscious personality, the ego, identifies completely with the all-good persona. I am good, I am loving, I am kind. The shadow, meanwhile, becomes a dense and undifferentiated reservoir of everything bad. There is no bridge between these two realms, no communication. They are experienced as two separate, warring entities. Jung would see the phenomenon of splitting as the external projection of this internal, unhealed division. When a person with this internal structure meets another person, they cannot see them as a whole, complex human being with both good and bad qualities. Instead, they project their own internal split onto the other person. Initially, they might project their idealized all-good self, seeing the other person as the perfect savior who will finally heal them. But the moment that person shows an ounce of human imperfection, they trigger the disowned shadow. The all-bad is then projected, and the person flips from being a savior to being a monster. It is a desperate, unconscious attempt to keep the inner world pure and all-good by externalizing everything that is perceived as bad. The tragedy, as Jung would point out, is that this defensive maneuver prevents any real human connection and keeps the individual trapped in a chaotic and lonely cycle of idealization and devaluation, forever reenacting their own internal, unhealed war. This defensive splitting of the inner world into all good and all bad has its roots, as psychoanalytic thinkers after Jung would agree, in our earliest developmental stages. Think of an infant's experience of its caregiver. When the baby is hungry and cries, and the mother comes to feed and soothe it, that is the good mother. She is a source of comfort, nourishment, and life itself. But when the baby is in distress and the mother is not immediately available, that absence is experienced as a profound threat. This is the bad mother, a source of frustration, terror, and a feeling of annihilation. At this primitive stage of development, the infant's psyche is not yet sophisticated enough to integrate these two opposing experiences into a single, cohesive whole. The good mother and the bad mother are perceived as two entirely separate beings. As a healthy child develops, a miraculous process of integration occurs. Through consistent and good enough caregiving, the child begins to understand that the mother who sometimes frustrates them is the very same mother who loves and nourishes them. They learn to hold both realities at once. Mommy is good even when she makes me wait. I can be angry with her and still love her, and she can be imperfect and still love me. This is the foundation of emotional maturity. It is the ability to see oneself and others in shades of grey, to embrace complexity, and to maintain a stable sense of self and other, even in the face of disappointment or conflict. But what happens if this crucial developmental stage is disrupted? What if a child grows up in an environment of profound invalidation, chaos, or trauma? What if the caregiver is radically inconsistent, one moment loving and the next abusive and terrifying? In such an environment, integration is not just difficult, it is dangerous. For a child to survive, they must keep these two opposing realities separate. To see the good parent who provides safety and the bad parent who inflicts terror as the same person would be psychologically unbearable. It would shatter their world. And so, the primitive defense of splitting is maintained as a necessary survival strategy. The child learns to see the abuser as two different people, the one they love and need, and the one they fear and hate. This defensive splitting of the other then becomes the blueprint for how they experience the world. It is no longer just the parent who is split. The entire world becomes divided into saints and demons, saviors and monsters. Jung would call this a profound complex, an emotionally charged cluster of unconscious ideas and images that functions like a splinter in the psyche. The trauma complex, in this case, forces the individual to perpetually reenact this pattern of splitting. The world is constantly scanned for signs of either absolute safety or absolute threat. A new friend or partner is immediately idealized and placed in the role of the good parent, the one who will finally provide the unconditional love and safety that was missing. But because no human being is perfect, disappointment is inevitable. And at the first sign of imperfection, the complex is triggered. The idealized image shatters, and the person is immediately cast into the role of the bad parent, the one who betrays, abandons, and destroys. This is why the experience can be so confusing and painful for those around the individual. How could I have been such a wonderful person this morning, and now, by lunchtime, you see me as the devil incarnate? The answer, from a Jungian perspective, is that they are not reacting to you as a whole person. They are reacting to the triggered projection of their own internal, unhealed split. In that moment, you have ceased to be a real, complex human being and have become a symbol, a screen upon which they are playing out the old, terrifying drama of their past. They almost literally see you as two different people. The clinical task, as Jung saw it, is not to tell the person they are wrong or to demand that they see you as all good again. That would simply reinforce the pattern. The true healing work lies in a process he called holding the tension of the opposites. The therapist or the loving friend or partner must be able to withstand being cast in the role of the bad other without retaliating or collapsing. They must hold a calm, consistent, and compassionate space, essentially communicating, "I understand you are feeling immense pain and rage toward me right now. I can hold that, and I am still here. I am not the monster you see, nor am I the savior you once thought. I am just a consistent, imperfect presence in your life. This is incredibly difficult work. It is like being the container for a raging storm, trusting that if you can hold steady, the storm will eventually pass and a moment of integration can occur. The goal is not to get them to think you are the greatest again. The goal is to help them slowly, painstakingly, begin to build the bridge between the two opposing worlds inside them, to learn that love and disappointment can coexist, that a person can be both flawed and trustworthy, and that they themselves can be both imperfect and worthy of love. The inability to integrate these opposing forces is not just a psychological defense, it has profound consequences for the individual's sense of self. When the inner world is split into a good me and a bad me, life becomes a terrifying and exhausting tightrope walk. The individual lives in constant mortal fear of the bad self, the part that holds all the anger, the shame, the neediness, and the vulnerability. Any sign of these feelings emerging is experienced not as a normal human emotion, but as a catastrophic threat, a sign that the bad self is about to take over and destroy everything. This leads to a frantic and often desperate attempt to maintain the all-good persona at all costs. This can manifest as relentless perfectionism, an impossible standard of behavior that leaves no room for error. A single mistake is not just a mistake, it is proof that the bad self is real, and the resulting shame can be utterly annihilating. It can also manifest as a chameleon-like tendency to merge with others, to lose one's own identity in an attempt to become whatever the other person wants them to be, all in a desperate bid to secure attachment and avoid the abandonment that would surely follow if their bad self were ever revealed. Jung would see this not as a character flaw, but as a tragic consequence of a psyche that has not been allowed to develop a stable center. The ego, which should act as the conscious mediator between the inner and outer worlds, is too weak and fragmented. It is constantly being hijacked by these powerful, opposing unconscious forces. The healing journey, therefore, is what Jung called individuation. It is the lifelong process of becoming a whole, complete, and individual self. For a person struggling with the wound of splitting, this journey has a very specific focus. It is the courageous work of turning toward the shadow. It is about slowly, gently, and with immense compassion, beginning to reclaim the parts of the self that were cast out into the darkness. This is terrifying work. It means facing the very anger, shame, and vulnerability that the individual has spent their entire life trying to avoid. But as Jung taught, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The gold, the treasure, the potential for wholeness is always hidden in the very places we are most afraid to look. How can a person begin this work? It often starts with learning to observe the split as it happens, without judgment. Instead of being completely swept away by the shift from idealization to devaluation, the individual can learn to create a tiny sliver of awareness, to say to themselves, this is happening, I am splitting. The simple act of naming the phenomenon creates a space between the emotion and the self. In that space, a choice becomes possible. This is often where a therapeutic relationship becomes crucial, as the therapist can act as an external ego, helping the individual to notice and name the pattern as it unfolds in real time. Another powerful tool is what Jung called active imagination. This is a practice of having a conscious dialogue with the figures of the inner world. An individual might be guided to have a conversation with the all-bad monster they so fear inside. They might ask it, "What do you want? What are you trying to protect me from? What is your story?" More often than not, what is discovered is that this feared monster is not a monster at all. It is a terrified, wounded inner child, frozen in time, holding all the pain and rage from past traumas. By listening to its story with compassion, instead of trying to silence or destroy it, the individual begins a process of internal reconnection. The bad part begins to feel seen and understood, and its ferocious energy can begin to soften. Ultimately, the goal of this work is integration. Integration does not mean that the bad parts disappear. It means that the wall between the good and bad begins to dissolve. The individual learns that they can be both angry and loving, both strong and vulnerable, both capable and flawed. They learn that their anger is not a monstrous force that will destroy everything, but a source of life-giving energy that can help them set boundaries and protect themselves. They learn that their vulnerability is not a weakness, but a doorway to deep and authentic connection. They begin to develop what modern psychology calls whole-object relations, the ability to see themselves and others as a complex, integrated mix of strengths and weaknesses, of light and shadow. This is a long and arduous journey. It is not a quick fix, but it is the path to true and lasting healing. As the individual slowly builds the bridge between the opposing sides of their psyche, the chaotic pendulum of splitting begins to slow down. Their relationships become more stable. Their sense of self becomes more solid. They are no longer a ship being tossed on a stormy sea of projections, but a vessel that is learning to navigate the waters of life with a growing sense of inner wholeness. Jung's wisdom, conceived in a different era, provides us with a timeless and compassionate map. It reminds us that the feeling of being split inside in all its forms is not a life sentence of disorder. It is a profound, albeit painful, invitation from the soul to embark on the most sacred journey of all, the journey of becoming whole.